Welcome to The Best Medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Bradley H. Werrell, and we're here to explore options and potentials to help us grow as individuals and as a community with one another in these difficult times and challenging times. We're exploring all manner of potentials related to the human experience, physical, psychological, medical, spiritual. It's a wonderful opportunity that we now experience in this critical phase of our human evolution. And I welcome you to join us in our podcast, become more aware, and identify with people who are helpful and supportive of you in your efforts as a human being on this planet and elsewhere too. We're going to be meeting people who are doing things that are widely variant from what is so-called normal within our society. In the creative space, within the social space, our common purpose, seeking to generate positive potentials to improve the lives of everyone in our sphere of influence, and to expand that sphere of influence so that we may positively influence others that are not yet engaged directly with us. That's the goal here. We will learn more about each other as we go. I wish you the very best. Thank you very much for tuning in.
There we are now.
Yeah, we're all new at it. I have a lot of Zoom meetings. I assume you do too. You're a physician. And
I do, but it's like this. I don't generally record them.
Oh, yeah,
So I'm doing this podcast thing and I record them and I hit the boom, the guy disappears. I'm like, oh. I'm sitting with Ian Martiszus, the founder of CureHub. We're just going to have a brief discussion. I want to introduce Ian and have a chat with him about how he came to found this organization, and we'll discuss that organization and what it does and what it's intended to do as we go. Welcome, Ian.
Hi, Dr. Werrell. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to get to know you and talk to your guests. Let them know what's going on at CureHub and how we're trying to give everybody an opportunity to get a COVID antibody test and participate in some citizen science and kind of bring some transparency to the COVID situation.
Very nice. So how did you come to this position where you founded this organization? Like, give us your background. How did you get here?
Okay, so going way back, I worked in cancer research for about a decade, cancer immunotherapy in particular. So I had a lot of wet lab experience, and I worked in basic research and preclinical research doing mouse studies and also clinical trials. So I had seen kind of top to bottom the whole cancer and research pipeline. But then I was kind of disenfranchised with kind of academic science. And so I decided to pursue other options for my career and taught myself to code, became a data analyst, got recruited to industry outside of science, and was working as a data analyst for about a year. And then COVID hit and I started to think about what I could do to help people with my skills. And so initially I was pulling public data from the internet that I could find that, and then making data visualizations to help people kind of understand maybe the risk of the disease and also the spread. I was really early on pulling the cases by state and putting them on an interactive map, and so people could see the number of cases in their area. And that was like down to the county level. And I had one that I looked at convalescent serum really early and about how many people you would need, how many donors you would need to keep up with demand at the current rate of infection and spread. I wrote a little article about convalescent serum therapy, and why we should pursue it super early on. And that eventually someone sent it to the coronavirus task force at the White House. And, I don't know what they did with it, but about a week and a half or 2 weeks later, they made an emergency use authorization for convalescent serum. That was back in March. And then everybody was kind of wondering, I was sick back in, winter of 2019. Was that COVID maybe? A lot of the COVID symptoms are really similar to the flu or a cold. And so you don't really know. And from my previous work in research, I knew that you could do an antibody test with an ELISA, and that would help answer that question. And around that time, I got a email from a vendor, just kind of like a spam email from when you order things from a vendor,
Right.
back when I'm in science, says, yeah, we got these COVID antibody tests or ELISAs. So I bought one with my own money. And I also had phlebotomy training, and I ended up finding 40 friends and family members who were interested in knowing if they had COVID. And, this was in early April. Back then, everybody was curious to know whether they had actually had it. Because like I said, most of us have had a cold or a flu in the wintertime, and the symptoms are similar. And so I collected their blood, ran their samples on this ELISA plate, and then I wrote up the results in a kind of scientific journal fashion with, like an introduction, methods, results, a discussion.
Sure.
And I just kind of published that onto the internet, onto social media and stuff, and it spread really widely because it was the first serum survey in the United States. At the time, there had not been another survey published.
Wow.
And in my study, all the participants were from Oregon, and 4 out of the 40 people tested positive for antibodies to the spike protein on the SARS-CoV-2 virus.
That's very interesting. So I saw the map of it, and this was drawn in March. The data.
Yes, it would have been early. Well, no, it would have been the first weekend of April that everybody was drawn.
Very early.
Yes, and so I wrote it up, and then a lot of people contacted me. The MIT Tech Review, they had a journalist contact me and write an article about it, the kind of citizen science biohackery approach to the pandemic. And after that, I was contacted by a lot of people who wanted to be tested because at the time there were not very many options, and we were in kind of a state of lockdown as a country, and there were people talking to me who, really wanted to visit their parents or grandparents who were stuck in a nursing home or, like maybe not that long left, and they were afraid of visiting them, and they wanted to know, like, do I have some immunity? Like, am I going to spread this? Do I have it or have I had it? And this was people, really it was people all over the world, but mainly in the United States contacting me. And so then I was thinking, I really want to help these people, but there's a lot of liability for me if I just go out and collect blood samples and tell people the results from this antibody test. And as much as I want to help people,
there's a limit on how much risk you're going to take. I get it.
Yeah. It's one thing when I'm like to my buddy, hey, can I draw your blood? And, these results may or may not be true because, at the time the tests are like not really proven because
the
virus has only been around for a couple months. So it's, easy to say that to somebody you know, and you can meet in person.
That's right.
And then somebody across the country that you've never met, you don't really know their intentions,
That's right. That's
so
right.
you gotta.
That's right. Your professional liability is there.
Yeah. So then I created the company to do this testing, and I got. So I'm not a physician, and then I'm also not tied to a CLIA lab, which is the certified lab for running diagnostic tests. So it's like, how can I do this? Because I want to help people. And I wrote it up as a research study, and I got an IRB approval to do this as a research study. And
it's very technical. We have to back up a step. The technicalities are going to exceed the buffer of the audience, I fear. So it's IRB is an institutional review board for human research subjects for the audience, right? And
yes,
it's like CLIA is a I don't know what that acronym means, but it's like CLIA waived labs is like it's a federal.
CLIA is Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments, and that's the certification you need to actually diagnose disease. And to have a CLIA lab, you have to have a board certified pathologist as the laboratory director, which I am not. And I actually contacted some different pathologists about being, a lab director for me,
right?
Or using their labs, but I was unable to do that. I'm just kind of nobody at this point. People are like,
at this point, like right now, or in the past?
Oh, both.
You're a hacker, man. I like that.
Not in the future, though. Not in the future.
Not even in the present. To be honest with me, as far as I'm concerned, you qualify as a real person, man, and a doer, and a go-getter, and it's very impressive to even have the ambition to accomplish what you have accomplished. Is no small feat, because it's like you're just going up a big hill, and with no end in sight. Like, where's the end of the hill? And it's like, it's just all uphill and rocky roads up the hill.
Yeah.
And it's good, man. It's good work.
I wish you would have told me that before I started, because
I know, right? So the same thing with me being a private family practice doctor. It's like, whoa, what?
Yeah. This is hard.
It's way hard. And it's like, okay. So it's like the interesting thing about this, and we can talk about this because it's the immunology of it is quite interesting, the COVID-19. Is that the CDC hasn't isolated a virus at this point, as far as I'm understanding it. They claim their website says they have not isolated a virus.
Really? I did not know that.
Right, and it goes to this. So the testing that is done is based upon presumed elements of a presumed virus.
Isn't it RNA based?
But where's the RNA coming from? It's not coming from the virus that they haven't isolated yet, is it? Right? So it's coming from presumed pieces of viruses that we think will be part of the thing.
So I know way back in January, China did not send any viral samples to the World Health Organization or to anyone. They sent genetic sequences of the virus.
And that's what this is what they're testing for, just sequences. And they have all these little snippets that they test for that are presumed to be part of the presumed virus that they have yet to isolate. And it's like fascinating to me as from the perspective of like, well, what are we talking about? And in my studies, and I'm not a great student of this, because I'm like I'm fairly satisfied with my level of knowledge, okay? Which is to say, there's something going on here that appears to be bad, and then there's a whole lot of smoke and dust and mirrors, and it's like, but it appears that there's no virus isolated. They're testing for sequences that they presume to be part of a presumed virus that they have yet to isolate. And in my research, I noted that they talk about cases, and I'm like, what's a case? Okay, and I'm like, a case appears to be tested positive for a sequence of a presumed virus. Whether or not you're symptomatic, you're a case.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of cases because there's a lot of testing, and there's a lot of, I regard as false positives. I think there's a lot of false positives in the PCR testing. That's polymerase chain reaction for the lay people out there, which is the majority of the tests are PCR tests, which they amplify to excess. I don't know. The amplification, I understand they're amplifying more than 40 times, which is like
really
a huge amount of amplifications, which is like, you will be able to explain that better to the audience than I would, because I'm more of a layperson in this regard than you are, okay? So please talk about the amplification process and describe for the public so that they can understand the amplifications and what seems to be a reasonable amount of amplification versus excessive amplification and false positives.
So the way the PCR works is you, okay, so in general terms, you have what are called primers, which are these kind of tags that attach to the genetic sequence that you're interested in seeing presence or absence of. So those tags attach to it, and then you add in an enzyme, and the enzyme is going to see those tags and then that are attached to the genetic sequence you're interested in, and the enzyme will just create another exact match of that genetic sequence you're interested in. So you start from one, genetic sequence of interest, and then after one round of amplification, you'd have two, because the enzyme comes in and doubles it. And then after 2 rounds, you'd have 4, and so on. And so it's this exponential increase in the amount of that genetic material of interest. Then once you reach a certain threshold of that genetic material that you're interested in, you can use like a fluorescent dye to visualize that material. And so then basically, by knowing how many steps of the amplification you've gone through, you can calculate how much of the original starting material you had. And they use these fluorescent dyes that are known to be visible at a certain level. And so there's thresholds. Anything below the threshold is kind of background from the assay, because the first tags that are on there, they can like attach to themselves a little bit and create false positives. And so you have to have a threshold set that once we have this amount of material, once we have this much fluorescent signal, then it's a positive result. And when you start from a low amount, it shouldn't take 40 cycles usually to get to a positive result. There's, it's been a long time since I did real-time PCR, but I think, 18 to 25 cycles is typically where you're going to start to see that signal. At 40 cycles, you're kind of left wondering if the result is true or not. In regards to COVID, I wasn't aware that the PCR was acting in that way, that you needed to go through 40 amplification cycles before you were able to actually identify the virus or not.
That's my understanding. That they said more than 40, and I was kind of, this technicalities is sort of outside the scope of what I'm familiar with, but I was impressed by it because that's I did the math on my calculator, on my computer there. It's a trillion times amplification.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's way more than.
And I
that
think
doesn't
the
make
public,
sense.
it depends on what you're trying to achieve with the test, right? And so the public, I believe, has a false impression about how this testing works and how interpretations are done, because it's like the reading of the test is a subjective matter, okay? And which is to say that the laboratory creates a standard by which they determine whether it's negative or positive based on a standard they establish, which is like, in this case, it would be how much fluorescence they get from the sample. And so they establish the standard on the low ends to be negative, knowing that there's going to be some false negatives. And they want to make it low enough that there's few false negatives, but they want to make it high enough that there's not too many false positives. And so that's right. the laboratory has to, or the standard established is varied in a manner that must adjust for these known error complications of the test, which is to say that my understanding, and it may be false, right? I just couched the sufficient amount of buffer in there so that I don't get hurt because I'm wrong, because it's easy to be wrong, which is that there's remarkable amount of false positives with the PCR testing.
Yes, PCR definitely can produce artifacts, and you don't, if something isn't crossing that threshold until 40 cycles, that's a red flag, in my opinion. And that has nothing to do with COVID. It's just, back when I was doing those type of experiments, that would have been something that I would be looking at with skepticism. And with the antibody testing, it's kind of the same way. When you do these tests, it's interesting. When you're actually the one with it in your hands and reading the test on the machine, you become aware of all the different ways that the test could be wrong or misleading. And so then I feel like it's harder for me to trust results than it is for almost anybody else who's like reading a paper I wrote. They just, oh yeah, it was totally like 4 out of 40 people positive. And to be honest, that I'm a little bit skeptical that those 4 people were positive back in April. I've run each of their samples with a new antibody test that looks at neutralization of like synthetic viral particles. And all of those samples tested negative, but they're high for these antibodies that recognize this protein on COVID, on the virus.
Surface protein?
Yeah, surface protein. It's the viral docking protein. So it's like a protein on the surface of the virus that docks to the receptor on the human cell. And when that docking happens, then the virus can enter the cell. And most of the antibody tests out there are looking at antibodies to that viral docking protein. It's called spike 1.
Right. So the public might be interested to know this, that many of these viral proteins are shared between coronaviruses, which are not uncommon, right? But just to more background for the public, the coronavirus is a general class of viruses, of which this one is supposedly unique. And go ahead.
Yeah. All of the coronaviruses in this family have the spike protein. They're slightly different. There's a little bit of evolution that happens over time, and that evolution causes slight changes to the structure of the spike protein. Those changes can affect, antibody binding. There's a lot of research out there that shows exposure to past coronavirus infection can actually provide some, you can't really say protection, immune protection, because unless you expose somebody to COVID and they don't get sick, then you don't really know if they're protected. But what you can look at is, do they have antibodies that recognize the COVID spike protein version? And there's a lot of studies out there that I've read that show people who have been exposed to your cold-like endemic, they're found in our population normally. These cold-like coronaviruses, they can have antibodies that recognize the COVID spike protein. Same with people who have had the original SARS or MERS. And that's not to say that it's a one-to-one relationship where if you've had the cold-like coronavirus, you're going to have an antibody that recognizes the COVID virus. No, it's much lower because these spike proteins are different enough that you're not always going to have that cross-reactive antibody response. But because of the nature of immunity and in a humoral response, which is the term used to describe antibody production, then the way our immune system works, it just creates a ton of antibodies that are kind of targeted at this one spike protein, but they're all slightly different, and your body goes through a selection process to try and use the best antibody for the job. And because, people are so different genetically and the way the immune system works, you have a lot of different variations of this antibody against the same target across, the human population.
It's very distracting to the population. So like the average public, right? You gotta go. So you gotta recognize this, Ian. You have such specialized knowledge, okay? And it is like specialized from my perspective as a physician, even. And it's like, because it's like, it's like bringing back all my days in immunology, or you know what I mean? And it's like,
yeah.
And it's like this is like the public is like this. They have this impression, in my opinion. This is just my opinion, but I deal with the public on a regular basis. Is they just want to know. They want to take a test, and they believe the test tells them a good answer, and they want to know if they're positive or negative, and they don't recognize all this uncertainty and fogginess in the equation, which is like, okay, and it's way more foggy than anyone wants to admit to. I'm pretty sure. And it's tricky, and it's like. So I get asked a lot. People want to be tested. The public is like this. So look, they ran into someone who tested positive, and they go, "Should I be tested?" And I'm a waggy kind of to get up for a doctor. I'm like, tested for what? Right? Because I'm like gonna make you talk about it. I'm gonna have this conversation. So we have to kind of just I don't presume anything because I'm like that's the way I play. So. The issue is this, it's like there's a lot of desire for testing that is exceeding the medical necessity, which is to say, look, you have no symptoms. Why do you think you need a test? And it's like I run into complications that are quite interesting because the people test and they test positive. Someone gives them a positive result. And now I got a guy, he's calling me from Florida, and he's like, I can't go to work until I test negative, and I keep testing every 2 weeks positive. And I can't see my kid until I test negative. And it's like, whoa, that's messed up, man. This is I call this a psychosocial complication, right? Socioeconomic complications based on medical testing. And it's like, and it's like when you get tested, you are creating a potential, especially if you report it to human resources, for yourself to suffer from socioeconomic complications that are outside the medical arena, regardless of your symptomatology. And which is like, you sure you want to do that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like you said earlier about the cases and how do you define a case? It's exactly right. There's, it's almost like an obsession with testing now, and people wanting to know. And like you said, there's a lot of ramifications for that test. For probably, I think every state now, a positive test or any test is a mandatory reporting to the state's health department.
Wow.
I know in Oregon it is. So.
Right. So they hired a bunch of people to be contact tracers, and it's like this Gestapo that, who did you talk to? And
yeah,
it's fascinating.
If you had a business and you tested all of your employees randomly, and we know that, 40% of people are asymptomatic, then, and 40% of your employees test positive, even though they're not sick, then the state is probably going to come and try and shut down your business, even though nobody had symptoms. But at the same time, I've talked to people who have had it, and some people who are not doing well, who don't think they're doing well, and have had severe complications from it. So, it's kind of interesting because I don't see many people out there that have the perspective that I do, that it's, something that can be very serious and make people really sick and kill them, but at the same time, you got to balance the cost benefits of the different actions we're taking, which is kind of why I did the first antibody survey, because we were, being put under lockdown. Government was making all these decisions without a lot of information, and they were kind of going with the more authoritarian approach to this. And it's like, well, hold up. We don't even know how far it spread, how many people have been exposed who could be immune. And you want to make all these decisions. It seems short-sighted to me. And you're kind of like blindly forging this path when there are tools out there. That was another point that I was trying to do when I did the first serum survey, is like, hey, why am I, a guy who's not even working in science anymore, why am I the first one to do this? Because if I was at my old lab, I would have been able to buy this kit, a month ago, could test all kinds of people real quick. I mean, I worked at a hospital. They have all the resources at their disposal. Why was I the first one to do this all by myself? So where were the people that were supposed to be doing this sort of thing?
That's an interesting question right there.
How come they didn't think about it?
There's a presumption there. That's quite interesting. With the people who are supposed to do something, which is like, okay, it's supposed by whom, right? And it's like, supposed by you, right? And supposed by me, but it's like this, they're being sort of derelict. They're not performing in a manner that would be consistent with our presumed expectations of professionals in the field, right?
Exactly. The general public relies on, these research centers, and
that's right.
It was kind of crazy. I'm thinking about it at the time, like, I've worked in all these labs, these people who are immunologists. We have a pandemic. This is what you're here for. This is why you went to school, to get your PhD. You didn't get your PhD, hopefully, to just sit at your desk and write grants every day, with that get rejected almost every time.
I go like this, man. I like this. It's like the grants and research are so intimately related and ultimately controlled by select few elite that are, I believe there's an agenda afoot, but that's my opinion. And it's not founded, and it's conspiracy theory. So it's like, you get my point? And it's like, it's not provable, which is, it's not easily provable. And but evidently we can look at the outcome or the behavior of the institutions. It certainly seems to have failed to meet our expectations of reasonable given the circumstances. Is that fair?
Yes, I think they failed us early on. I mean, like I said, that's why they got their degree, I would think. so you know how to do these things when the situation arises that the public needs answers. We need people who know how to do these things, do it rapidly.
Well, see, that's it. The points of this, it's like the policymakers. So that will be the authority figures who are in charge of the police powers of the state. They appear to be responsive to some political agenda. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the virus definitely got politicized, and like I said at the beginning of the podcast, I was initially taking data on cases and putting them on these visualizations on these public dashboards for people to see. Well, I stopped doing that because I realized that the data was being gamed.
How so?
Well, when people start reporting on the number of cases, but they're not reporting on the total number of tests, then, that's a misleading result, right? If they're reporting on the number of cases, but they're not reporting on the number of hospitalizations, that's misleading. If they're not reporting on the number of people in the ICU, versus hospitalized, that's misleading. Because, a lot of what we did or what was done to mitigate the spread of the virus was allegedly done to prevent overflow of our ICUs, which would prevent, people from not being seen by the doctor because we just don't have the resources. So that was
the initially it was flatten the curve.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's interestingly, because it's the ICU admissions never really blew up. They didn't explode the ICUs, and the ICUs are largely, there's a lot of occupancy potential left at this point. And then there was this translation over the summer, and now it's cases, and it's like everybody's hyperbolically reporting cases, and it's like, yeah, now what are we talking about, right?
Yeah. And also, the ages of the people that are getting it, the comorbidities of the people that are getting it, the type of information that you need if you really want to assess how severe this is, how big of a problem it is for our general population. So none of that stuff's reported. They're pushing out, one number at a time. And
so epidemiologists appear to have failed as well.
I guess it's hard for me to know where the failure lies. And I don't know, you're in Arizona and it could be different in your state. Every state's a little bit different. In Oregon, I would say our health departments, the Oregon Health Authority, they, in my opinion, were a failure. I bring up to my friends the day after I published my serum survey, which was the first in the nation, and I included a questionnaire on it about exposures and stuff. And so it was a lot of good information that went along with the test results, like the symptoms of people who thought that they had a cold or flu and stuff like that, and who tested positive. So the day after I published that, Oregon Health Authority published their guide on how to have phone sex during COVID.
Oh my.
And it's like, are you serious? Like, I'm the one publishing the serum survey and you're trying to tell adults this? Like, you're a joke. You're like, I can't take you seriously anymore.
Interesting. So my impression from the whole thing is this is like the institutions operate in a manner, and I draw a picture that looks like this. This is the picture I draw, this is the operation of the institutions, which is the institution broadcasts the truth, and the people are supposed to receive it at the bottom of the picture. And this is what we're doing here, which is you're generating information and publishing it out for the public to consider, regardless of the institutions that are doing their own thing. But they're trying to project a authoritarian pattern of function in our society based upon limited information that it's in conflict with the sensibilities we can make. Because I mean, you're essentially a lay guide that has exceptional background, able to pull together by virtue of your contacts, et cetera, to generate a valid, useful study that was the first in the nation. And now you've decided to project further. And I want to ask you about your company. How does your company work?
So, yeah, I wanted to provide a platform for people to get the antibody testing. And I also wanted to do it in a way that anybody in the US could sign up and get their test. Mm-hmm. And so I created an at-home sample collection kit, which is super cool. And it's just a finger stick. I send you a kit to your house. You don't even have to leave home. You can sign up online. The whole process is with these online forms. And so you take—
Is it anonymized?
Yep, it'll be anonymized.
That's good.
Then I publish the results, the de-identified results, on my website on this dashboard. And there's a questionnaire that goes along with it that asks if you've had a known exposure. It says, what is your occupation? If somebody has had a known exposure, it'll ask them, what type of environment were you exposed in? Then it asks if you've had a positive COVID test. And the goal is to try and tease apart what types of people and occupations and spaces put you most at risk for COVID. And then you also get an antibody test, and I can send you your results. And then I take all that de-identified information, and you're assigned a random number. And then I put the results on the website for anybody to look at. And my goal is just to bring transparency to it. It's a citizen science project, which means you get to sign up. Anybody from the public can sign up and participate in this science project. And part of that, it's funded by the participant. So you pay for your antibody test, which is no different than going to the doctor. And that's the funding source. I have no outside funding. The only funding I have is from whoever participates, whoever chooses to participate.
That's a disclaimer. It's like that. There's no outside influence here.
Exactly.
It's for the public interest. I like that.
Exactly. I just want it to.
But that's how you got past the regulatory burden.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think if I had outside funding, they still would have let me proceed.
No. I'm not. No, I'm talking about the anonymization and the research nature of it. As a public research project, it allows you to do what you do and not get in trouble with the authority figures who may choose to hit you with a hammer because of blah, 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 blah. Authority figure gets to hammer you because professional conduct or ethics violations. But you have the institutional review board, so you're ethically okay. But anyway, it's like these boards and like the medical board will maybe try to hammer you for whatever, and it's it's okay, man. It's how you navigate around these minds,
Yeah, it was a really long journey. Getting into it, I was a bit naive.
I had to wake it right up, won't it? So here's the coffee.
What's that?
Here's the coffee. It's wake up now, man.
Yeah. So, but, just making it through the process, I learned a lot, and I feel like just getting the approval to do it says a lot about, my abilities.
Oh, yeah.
How
many people have you tested now?
Well, tested in the study or tested total?
In your study.
In the study, I'm up to 13 people so far. We just opened recently. Anybody who's listening should go to cure-hub.com.
Well, make sure that's in the show notes, okay?
Okay. Because like I said, this is all about transparency and creating something that the public can participate in. There's nothing going to be gamed here. I'm publishing the results.
Plain data.
for anybody to see. Anybody in the public can go and look at the dashboard for free. It's up on the website right now. As more samples come in, I'll be able to improve the dashboard and start to show a map of the results. It's just when you have so few results, you can't show where they're from, because that'll tip off who is positive or negative. So that can't be done until we reach like 10 people in each state is the typical level. But anyway, sign up. I ship a kit to your door. It's just a finger stick. You collect your sample, ship it back to me. I run your test, put your de-identified data on the dashboard, let anybody see where the hot spots are, who's at risk, what the relative percentage of positive and negative results are in the area eventually. And so, and then there's no outside funding, there's nobody trying to get me to put my finger on the scale, so to speak. And so that, your payment for the test is how this study is able to proceed. And it's only through that.
So any other information you need the people to know about to participate in your study?
So you have to be an adult, non-pregnant, and non-incarcerated, and English speaking. So those are not my rules. They're rules from basically U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So to be considered a minimal risk study, which I need it to be, so that I could do an online consent form. You have to consent to the study, and also to return results to people, and also to collect a little bit of blood via finger stick. Those are all minimal risk, or to be considered minimal risk with all those things going on. Non-pregnant, non-incarcerated adult who speaks English. I don't have interpreters. Pregnant women, there's limits on the amount of blood that are collected from them over a certain period of time. So I can't control for that. And then incarcerated people can be coerced into participation. So those are why they can't participate.
That's all right, man. So it's like that. They can sign up right now by signing into cure-hub.com.
Yes, correct. And you can also look at the results.
And how fast did the results come back?
I've been sending results back within a couple of days lately of me receiving the sample.
Right.
Yeah. So
do you send out a return envelope?
For sure.
Does it go with a return envelope for them?
Yep. I ship everything you need. There's the return shipping packaging. So you receive your package, you take the kit out, you take the return package envelope out, you open up the kit, you pull out the little tube, you pull out the little finger lancet, you prick your finger, you collect the blood in the tube, you close up the tube, you put it back in the kit box, and then you with the ice pack, and then you put it in the return shipping packaging, which is pre-addressed, prepaid for, put it in your mailbox or drop it off at the post office. Comes back to me within 24 hours from anywhere in the U.S. I've collected samples across the country. I'm in Oregon, and the furthest I think I've collected was Florida. Comes within 24 hours. I've done tests. The antibody is stable for out to 72 hours at room temperature, which doesn't really matter because there's an ice pack that comes with the kit. I have an instructional video that you can watch that shows you how to collect your sample. There's a booklet that comes with it, with the kit. And yeah, you get to participate in citizen science. It's funny, when I first started the project, I put some ads on Facebook and stuff, get people interested, trying to do my outreach, my marketing. And there is a lot of negative reaction from people who are kind of considering it to be a hoax in a way, the virus a hoax and
Oh,
stuff like that. And I'm like, well, the way to prove it's a hoax is you could kind of be tested, do the antibody testing. Dude, that's what I'm going for here, is just to try and figure out the truth and present the results.
That's right.
To the public with no filter. They have not been filtered or anything. And so
there, you got negative response though.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are not, didn't really believe it was an issue. It's kind of interesting because, like you said earlier, the politics that got involved influenced the way people perceive the virus. And
yeah, I'd say so. And it's like the institutional response. It's the institutional response which guides the public imagination with regard to how they perceive the event, like the phenomena.
Yes. And they are not wrong in being a little bit skeptical of at least the institutional response, like you said, because it felt like to me a lot of the people who were making these decisions for lockdown and stuff, they're looking at one variable. They're looking at this virus, the single variable. But our world has millions, or who knows how many variables, but there's definitely more than one. And, economics is another significant variable. And economics ties back into health, population health. And
that's right.
There's a lot of studies on the negative impacts of
yes, my great concern with this is this authoritarian response, and I regard it as hyperactive response by the political agencies for political purposes is detrimental to the public well-being, regardless of how it interacts with this particular viral consideration, because economically we're going to have a big problem economically, and it will adversely impact the psychosocial functionality of the population as a whole, increasing suicidality and other depression, et cetera, and that, in addition to the isolation that has occurred because of this forced isolation for children and people that are not sick, it's not well considered at the authority in the authorities, by the authorities. They're considered. I think that their primary consideration is not the virus but the politics, to be honest.
Yeah, it's sad, and I think that's a big signal to the public, or I would hope it's a big signal to the public that maybe the people that are in those political positions who are making those decisions should not be trusted with power, right?
It's an interesting thing because it's like when we think of our public health authorities, we don't think of them as political agents, right? And it's like we trust them in a way that we don't trust politicians, and yet they're acting in a political way, which is really disturbing, right? And I guess it goes to how our trust in authorities, and it's like that's what's being tested here, in my opinion, which is the authorities are being tested by the public, or the public should be looking at them through different eyes based upon their reaction. That, like, what is the appropriate action? And it's like that. Like if you look at say Victoria, Australia, it's straight up. It looks like jackboots arresting people for not wearing a mask on the street, or even speaking online against the over exuberant hyperactivity of the government with regard to this. They will bust the people for having a protest in their own house on Zoom. And it's like, wow, free speech out the window. Really? That seems a little bit extreme, guys. And I don't think that's a good plan. But that's just my political opinion, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point. And a lot of that perspective, not yours, but the people who think it's appropriate to do those type of things, you can't have that perspective without thinking that you know exactly what to do, right? But nobody knows what to do is the thing. Like, how does anybody know what to do with this virus that has only been around for, I mean, almost a year now, but hasn't been around for very long. Nobody's ever tried any of these things before, right? There's no base case of kind of permanent lockdowns to solve a pandemic.
Well, that's interesting.
Like I said at the start,
that term
what?
you used, that term pandemic is an interesting term, right? Which is to say it's not an epidemic, which is a different term. And it's like pandemic was recently redefined prior to this particular viral case coming into focus. They redefined it so this otherwise would not have fit. Pandemic means it is a virus that is not locally controlled. It's everywhere to some extent. But it does not mean it's influencing a large number of the population anywhere. It's just everywhere. It may be in very low quantities in everywhere. And it qualifies as a pandemic according to the new standard, I suppose. And so they changed the definitions of the words, but it looks to me like the purpose of it, and we'll get back to my conspiratorial thinking, which is this, is to cause a political reaction based upon authoritative positions taken by select scientists in positions of authority as recognized by the public. So that's that's the justification for what is going on, is he said so. It was that guy up there, the one on top of the hill, that is the one in charge of telling us what to do. That's the authority by which we know what to do. And all the people down below in the system of the social organization, right? The socio-hierarchical structure, like the police know what to do because they're told what to do by their boss, who tells them what to do based upon their boss, based upon that guy up on top of the hill again, right? And it's like, and it has nothing to do with anything factual, but chains of command.
Yes.
And it's like authoritative in a nature.
And, you know, that's not what our country is supposed to be about, really. We're a republic, and, you know, I'm a strong believer in the whole concept of laboratories of democracy for each state. And what that means to me is that you have a system in place that is more of kind of an open market, and you're trying to allow create a potential for the best ideas to percolate to the top, right? Because the best ideas will spread more rapidly, right? They'll take on better legs than bad ideas. But as soon as you start to come in with this heavy-handed authoritarianism, you completely circumvent that system, right? That system that allows good ideas to come out of nowhere and become the dogma rather than just asserting dogma from the top.
Based on the auspices of emergency. It's an emergency.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so I like this. I like your science, your citizen scientist work. That's awesome, man. And it's like, that's the kind of spirit that I appreciate and wish to encourage at every turn, because it's like, it's no small thing. It's like that we should be responsible as citizens to gather information that is useful and actionable independently and for our own purposes, which is to say for the public good, which is, that's my interest, is interested in the public, taking care of the public, because that's how we have to do it, because we can't trust the authorities that we pay so much for, apparently. And I'm like, well, that's okay too. We learn a lot by abusive authority tells us how much to consider authorities, right?
Yeah, it is pretty eye-opening, that's for sure.
But it's a tough lesson though, huh?
Yeah, we'll see. We don't really know the long-term ramifications of any of this, but the economy seems to be bouncing back. I feel bad for kids, mostly. Kids and older parents. My grandmother actually died during the early part of the pandemic in March. luckily I was able to visit her and be with her.
No, that's right. I was working at a nursing home briefly, March, April, and they locked that place down so tight, and it was like, man, I felt bad for the people who were living there because they can't get a visitor, and they just isolated them and restricted. I mean, they're already pretty restricted in their behavioral functions, how much activity that they get to do, and then they restricted them so tightly. I'm like, man, this is going to make these poor people crazy, and everybody's wearing a mask. You can't even see a person smile at you. I'm like, this is just awful. And it's like, I think there's going to be class action suits coming out against the governor of, say, New York and a couple other states that forced the COVID into the nursing homes, which was certainly detrimental to the population inside those places who were susceptible to the bad effects that are, due to it.
And that's what happens when you have that authoritarian response, right? Is people who don't really know what they're doing, like in New York, like their governor who, sent people to nursing homes. That's a terrible decision. If you have an open market system, sure, somebody might make a stupid decision like that, but then somebody else might not make that decision and say this sick person should just stay at home, right? And avoid contact with others and keep them away from other elderly people who might have a compromised immune system. And then, over a little bit of time, people will realize, oh yeah, that is the good response. That's the correct response, not.
Right. And it's like it limits the damage.
Exactly.
And it's like, so, and what really is offensive about it is the political actors are allowed to generate damage without liability, it appears. And that is unacceptable, especially when we're talking about people's lives and well-being, and it's just awful. And it's like when the only sanction is the ballot box that's coming in 2 years or something, it's like, man, there should be a legal repercussion to it as well, which is that's okay. We are not going to solve that problem in this podcast, I'm afraid.
No.
But it's like this. It's all very good. It's like I'm very encouraged by your work. And like I say, it's interesting. Did you have a lab in your garage or something? What do you do?
well, the first test I did, I kind of had a lab in my basement. But now I have an official lab, actually.
So you rent a place?
It's good, low key. What?
You have a rented location?
Yeah, I'm renting a lab like in town. So I am official now.
Attaboy.
Which is cool. It's not just in my basement anymore.
That's right. No, it's no small thing. And it's like, I don't know, it's when you talk about that, it's like this is a next level up. It's a huge leap. And it's like, because you're committed now to a greater extent than you were a minute ago, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's scary. And doing it all on my own, financing it on my own, it's not been easy. I'm hoping to get enough people to sign up that it ends up being worth it. And even not even financially, just like from kind of a science perspective, because, I was a scientist at one point.
Oh, I don't accept that. Was a scientist? No, you're a scientist, man. So you're a scientist.
I do hope enough people sign up that we can get some quality data out of the study, And
do you have an idea how many people that would be?
Well, I got approval to test 10,000 people total, and I can always expand that. That would be about 200 people per state, which would be pretty good, I would think, to give a kind of ballpark perspective of what's going on out there. And the questionnaire really helps to add some context. That's the big part that's missing from a lot of these studies that I see out there that do similar things, like looking at antibody levels in the population. They don't have a questionnaire, but you need that context. You need to know the demographics of the people who were tested, their occupation, have they been exposed? Where were you exposed? You know, and then you tie all that back into the antibody levels.
So here's a question then. Are you going to make the data open source?
Yes.
So
yes.
Anybody who wants to write a paper about it can have access to the information?
Correct. Yep. De-identified information will be published. You can view the results right now on the website. You can't download the data. I can put that up. I should do that. I just didn't have enough data yet for it to be relevant.
It's not worth doing until it's worth doing, right? It's okay.
Yeah, there's just not a high enough power to this study, as right. They say.
So power is based on the population that participates, by the way, for the public.
Right? Yes, correct.
You're doing good work, man. Like I say, I wish you did the very best and encourage you in this. And like I say, check cure-hub.com and participate in Ian's study. I think it will be a great thing.
Well, I really appreciate that, and thanks for having me on the podcast.
Well, I appreciate your participation, and like I say, we'll look forward to chatting with you again when you get maybe another 10 or 20,000 people through your lab, right? And see what happens next, right?
Yeah,
it's quite an adventure you have going here, and it's all of us are on this adventure, and we're on the same boat together, and unavoidably so. So it is how we participate in the creation of what is to come that matters, right?
Yeah, it's right. You just chip in however you can, right?
I'm going to go check it out. I'll check your website out as soon as we sign off here, and I upload this to the great internet, and we'll see what happens next, right?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe this will be the break I needed.
Well, I don't know about that. I hope so, but I'm like this. I don't hold out that much hope for what my reach is, but it's okay. Ian Martiszus, thank you again, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Worrell.
You take care.
Bye.